For several consecutive winters, Ontario honeybees have been dying in droves, often at rates double the national average. To get up on the buzz and find out how to safeguard our pollinators, we are joined by Tibor Szabo. He is president of the Ontario Beekeepers Association. Mrow, professor of biology at York University, and Sheila Kolla, assistant professor in the Faculty of Environmental Studies, also at York University. And we're happy to welcome all three of you to TVO tonight. Tibor, I want to start with you. We suggested in the intro, things are really bad. Put a little more information on that, if you would. How bad?
Very bad. Last year, 2015, the overwinter loss was 38% in Ontario.
Just explain what that means.
It means 38% of the managed bee colonies in Ontario, honeybee colonies, perished during the winter period. The year before, 58% perished during the winter period. And that doesn't include summer losses, which in many cases equal the winter losses.
What would be a normal percentage for lost over the winter?
A normal percentage is in the 10 to 15% range.
So this is way beyond that.
Way beyond that.
And the explanation is?
Well, the explanation is the bees are picking up these neurotoxins from the wild plants surrounding the corn and soy fields, and off the corn pollen as well, and off the field water that they drink. And it's impacting their ability to survive.
Let's again see if we can just get a little more amplification on why this is happening. Pesticides, right? What's going on?
So pesticides are in Ontario and in Quebec are linked to honeybee death, especially around corn planting. And there's research suggesting that that bees experiencing sublethal amounts of pesticides, especially neonicotinoids.
Say that word again, neonicotinoid?
Neonicotinoids.
What's that mean?
It's a pesticide that is modeled to resemble the nicotine molecule, which for insects, it interferes with neuronal signaling, so signal transmission in the brain.
Is there something newer and more dangerous about the pesticides that are being used now that makes so many more bees die that, say, wouldn't have happened 25 years ago?
So they're systemic and they're water soluble. Systemic means that once they are put in the soil, they're taken up by all parts of the plants. And they're water soluble, which means that when you put them on a field and then it rains, then they disperse through the environment. So they leak through the ecosystem. They don't stay put and work for a specific time. Once you put them in the environment, they move very readily from where we want them to be on crops to outside of crops into natural areas.
All right, let's do a clip here. Around the world, there have been steps taken to protect bees from all of the things that we've been talking about here, but there has also been some resistance to some of these moves as well. And we just want to play an excerpt here. This is a report from NBC News in the States, just to sort of bring us up to speed on some of those efforts, and then we'll come back and chat. Go ahead, Sheldon, let's roll the clip.
University of California at Davis researcher Eric Musin has identified residues of 150 different chemicals in the bee colonies he's studied.
When you mix certain chemicals in together, they become much more toxic to the bees than either one of them alone would be.
The European Union voted to suspend the use of neonicotinoids, systemic pesticides widely used on corn, wheat, and soybeans because of possible links to bee collapse. The pesticide industry disputes any connection, saying the scientific basis for such a decision is poor.
Okay, lots to follow up on there. Do you believe that these, can I just call them neonics? Is that a nice short form?
Let's go with that.
That the neonics, the pesticides that they are spraying that are affecting the status of the bee population are as dangerous as beekeepers say they are?
I think they definitely are. I mean, they're insecticides. They're designed to kill insects. Bees happen to be insects. It's sort of a recipe for disaster. I also work on wild bees outside of agricultural areas, so we know there are additional threats, not only pesticide use, but climate change, habitat loss, and diseases are also issues with wild bees as well.
You are allowed to correct the host when he's wrong,
Okay.
incidentally, because they're not sprayed, are they? They're actually on the seeds?
They're
when
both, yeah, they're both
sprayed?
seed treated and sprayed, and I think there's also a soil drench option as well, so
Okay.
a variety of ways to apply it.
And I presume you believe that these pesticides are dangerous and extremely adversely affecting your income.
According to the Pest Management Regulatory Agency in Canada, these are the most toxic substances known to bees that's ever been produced. They're persistent in the environment, which means that the exposure to the colony is throughout the whole season. And the mixing of chemicals that was in the clip, it's not necessarily a farmer that's mixing them, but the residue or the persistent means they mix from one season to the next with crop rotation, or the bees themselves have such a large forage area that they're bringing in contaminated pollen or nectar from varying sources, and it gets mixed in the colony. And they synergize with each other, making them even more toxic, and they're neurotoxins, so it impacts their brains.
What's the farmer's argument to why they need to use this product, the Kaneo Nix?
For the longest time, there was actually no choice. So up to I think 3 years ago, every single corn seed sold in Ontario was treated with the neonicotinoid coatings. So the argument is that it protects its cheap insurance for the farmer by not having to do any extra work. They just buy the seeds that's treated with these toxins, they plant them, and they're kind of protecting their crop.
From what?
From pests that would eat corn.
So they're
different
actually,
stages.
they're not intended actually to go after the bees. The bees are just sort of collateral damage here.
Exactly, yeah. And there's other studies also showing that the benefits of this prophylactic treatment of corn is not there. So studies from the EPA as well as the PMRA showing that it doesn't actually seem to be any economic benefit for the farmer in terms of how well the yield is, the yield increase due to using these insecticides.
Okay, we saw in that clip what's happening in California. How about here in Ontario? What are we doing here to try to deal with this issue?
So the Ontario government introduced legislation to try to limit the use of neonicotinoids. So before it was just farmers bought the seed treated the seeds that are treated with neonicotinoids. Now a farmer has to demonstrate the need for these insecticides before they're used, which I think is a move in the right direction. It's just this putting pesticides on everything when we need it and we don't need it seems not a smart way to go.
What do you think of the Ontario government's response to this challenge?
One of the biggest issues right now is, so if we ban the neonics, what's going to come next, right? So we're still going to need pesticides. What we should be trying to shift towards is using pesticides only where we need them, so and in a way that they don't spread into natural areas and that they don't impact wildlife. So I think we need to think about sort of the bigger picture as well and not just focus too much on this, but it is a very good start.
The big change in this regulation compared to what happened before is that insecticide treated seeds will now be, they're now categorized as an insecticide, and they will fall under the same regulations as other pesticides that are sold. So that's how the government will be able to regulate this. In order to purchase seed, you need to show that if you want treated seed, you have to show that you actually need it. And so the farmer will have to just dig some holes in his field, do a few tests to see if they have these pests that are targeted. If they can prove that they need it, they will be able to obtain these chemicals on their seed. If not, they will order untreated seed. And there is a phase-in period. This upcoming planting season, farmers can plant up to 50% of their acreage with treated seeds, but the year after that, then it will be reduced to 20%, which is in line with the research that shows these pests only occur on about 20% of the fields anyways. There should be a cost savings by not having the insecticide on the seed.
Okay, but let's be clear here. The grain farmers of Ontario are not happy about this, right? I mean, they are going to the Court of Appeal.
Grain Farmers Association.
Grain Farmers Association are not happy about this. They're going to the Court of Appeal of Ontario to challenge the regulations that have been put in place. So I know you are making it sound as if it is not that big a difference to the way that they do business, but clearly they think so, right?
Well, the Grain Farmers Association does have an issue with this legislation. There's a lot of grain farmers themselves that are also beekeepers, and they're very, very happy with this, and they see that this is something that's needed.
Okay, moving on. Mrow, tell us about the genetics work that you are doing right now to try to help bees survive.
Okay, well, so in addition to pesticides, and pesticides are one of a big problem for bees right now, there's also other problems that we've known about for a while. These include varroa mites, several bacteria that could infect bees. Myself and a colleague at the University of British Columbia, Dr. Leonard Foster, we've been trying to develop ways to use genetics and genomics to breed healthier bees. And we recently got a large-scale project funded by Genome Canada and Genome British Columbia. And the goal of this, after 4 years of work, we're going to develop an infrastructure whereby beekeepers could send in samples of bees to several diagnostic centers within Canada and have these bees genetically tested and get a report back about their essentially potential in terms of how well they're likely to resist varroa, how well they're likely to maintain a clean and hygienic colony, how likely are they to be good honey producers and survive the winter. And based on this information, the beekeepers could then selectively breed colonies that have the best chance of being productive and healthy. And Ontario has been doing great at breeding bees using traditional methods, and in fact, Tibor has been doing.
Well, I wanted to follow up with him actually on this. Do you think it's possible to genetically modify bees to make them hardier?
Sorry, I'm just going to quickly, because you said genetic modification, and we're not creating genetically modified bees. We're not altering the honeybee's DNA. We're just providing ways to screen bees and having the bee breeders breed bees like they've done in the past. So we're just doing genetic screening, but not genetic modification.
Good clarification, okay.
It's actually breeding the honeybees is basically the choice of the beekeeper or the researcher that's watching the organism on what he chooses to propagate or not. And to propagate bees that are resistant to diseases and have good wintering ability and have high honey production, that's something that's been ongoing for decades in the bee world. But the traditional techniques are putting hives on scales and watching them closely, doing tests on the bees and seeing the results, watching the reaction of bees to different stimuluses. And those are traditional breeding techniques. What Mrow is doing that's really cutting edge is he's going away from all that traditional stuff and looking at the DNA itself for markers of these traits. Because, and it's really important because a lot of the immune system of the bee is behavioral. They have behavioral immunities. And instead of trying to watch these behaviors, especially in a climate with varying states of poisoning on different colonies, it's impossible to do traditional breeding techniques when your colonies are suffering from different states of poisoning because you don't see a clear picture. But if you go just to the DNA strands, and you will have you have the cleanest picture possible in a breeding situation. I think it's very interesting and exciting.
Is there something in your work as you try to get bees to be more resilient that you want to make sure doesn't get into their DNA or their genetics?
Yes, we're also developing tests to detect Africanized, so-called killer bees from the US. Unfortunately, because we lose a lot of our colonies and queens every winter, we rely on importing queens. Now, Ontario does have its own breeding program, but Canada just does not produce enough queens to satisfy internal demand. So we have to import.
Even him? Even him, eh? Not enough queen bees.
Traditionally, Ontario was a self-sufficient province with its bee needs. There's enough queen and bee producers traditionally in Ontario that we didn't really import bees. But last year, 33,000 queen bees and 20,000 packaged beehives, which each would have a queen as well, was imported. Pretty much half the population of Ontario managed beehives are imported as of last year. And this is related to the heavy losses because we've lost our ability to sustain. It's not sustainable, the current situation. The Western provinces have traditionally imported lots of bees every year.
And every time we import a bee from the US, we're essentially rolling the dice on getting a bee that's got Africanized genetics. And we don't want Africanized bees in Canada. So we're developing a test that's kind of based on ancestry, where you could analyze the DNA of a bee and determine whether it's Africanized or not Africanized.
Sheila, what can anybody watching this right now do?
Well, the first thing is to not fear bees. I mean, that's something we run into all the time. I think yellow jackets, specifically in late August, really give bees a bad rap. Those are wasps, and we're talking about bees here, and I think we made it clear, and people are starting to really appreciate the role that bees have in our ecosystems. So, you can plant a garden, use native plants, have things that are blooming all the way from first thing in the spring into the fall, because bees need forage all year all year long. You can also join, there's a variety of citizen science projects. So Bumblebee Watch is the one I'm involved with, and you just take pictures of bees and you're giving us data to start looking at some of these patterns in terms
There we've
of
got
how...
got a shot up there right now.
So how bumblebees particularly are being affected by climate change and pesticide use and habitat loss. So we need a lot of eyes on the ground, and this is the perfect way that you can help contribute to the science.
That's bumblebeewatch.org. Okay, very good.
And then also just being engaged in understanding these issues with, integrated pest management and pesticide use, and just, keeping aware of what your local MPP, what, they think about these issues, and just having that conversation.
I mean, we've heard this maybe a bit facetiously put in the past, but like the future of the world depends on a healthy bee stock, right? You want to make that argument?
I think, we'd have really expensive coffee, and maybe we'd be missing some important fruits and vegetables like tomatoes and peppers and berries. So that a lot of these things that we enjoy eating rely on insect pollination. We'd have a lot of rice and corn to eat because those are wind pollinated crops. So I don't know if we would die, but we would live sadder lives.
All right. So what's going to happen now?
Well, hopefully people will use these chemicals in a wiser fashion, understanding that they do impact pollinators, and our bee populations can recover, and we can go forward in a smarter and more responsible manner.
The Premier, of course, when she first got into office as the Premier, was the Agriculture Minister at the same time, which many people say gave her a heightened awareness of this issue, and she personally got involved in the file to try to find the compromise to make everybody happy. Do you think that's happened?
Well, I think they've done their best at finding a compromise to make everybody happy, because the fact of whether these chemicals are safe at all to use outside is still a question, but they're still available for people that need them. That does, and it also, by only restricting it to if you need it, it'll keep up to 80% of these chemicals from entering the environment, which will equal a healthier environment for pollinators. So yes, I think the Ontario government has done the best they could under these circumstances, because it's federally regulated. These chemicals are federally regulated, so provincial governments are limited to their extent of what they can do.
Okay, thanks for this, everybody. We'll keep watching.
Thank you.
Tibor Szabo, President, Ontario Beekeepers Association. Mrow, Department of Biology at York University. Sheila Kola, also at York University in the Faculty of Environmental Studies. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.